Your party is wandering down a long, twisting corridor. At the end of the corridor, there's an Etten. Two heads stare at you in unison and say, it's time to roll initiative. Welcome to Geekshow Tabletop. I'm Leigh George Cade, and this over here, oh, wrong way, over there.
Somewhere.
That's Robert Neal, and he's been kind enough to join me in our soft relaunch of Geekshow Tabletop. It had been a solo endeavor in the past, and I'm best in groups, kids. It's just the way it works. So, Rob, your background with tabletop games is more RPGs, but you have dabbled a bit in the miniature world.
Yes, so it's mostly RPGs. I actually started. No, is that true? No, that's not true. Did a little bit with chainmail back in the mid '80s.
Wow!
And then after that, miniatures used with different tabletop games, BattleTech, D&D, and then on forward into HeroClix even.
Yeah, BattleTech, as I like to call it, spreadsheet the game.
Pretty much.
Did you ever play Starfleet Battles, the other FASA spreadsheet game?
Yes. I actually have the deluxe Captain's Edition out in the other room.
Nice.
That somebody gifted me a few years ago.
Nice. I remember going through about 3 grease pencils with Starfleet Battles because we had the printouts of the ships with all the shield arrays on them and the hull points and everything, and we put them in the sleeve protectors and then scribble out the things, and many a night of my adolescence was spent developing early carpal tunnel syndrome. One of the things we wanted to talk about to kick things off, and it's kind of a vague topic, and it's one that's getting a lot of debate right now, is what is the ultimate edition of X? For instance, what is the best edition of Dungeons & Dragons? Is it the classic Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from 1979?
Is it?
Is it second edition? Good call. Is it the current? Well, not current, because now we're at 5.5. So there we go.
So we have both.
Yeah, so we got 5 and 5.5. Or is the current best edition of D&D something like, say, Pathfinder? So, which in its roots, its DNA, is D&D.
Is D&D.
Right? Yeah. And so I wanted to talk a bit about what best editions we currently hold dear and dear in our hearts. I know you're a big Shadowrun fan. And Shadowrun, if you're not familiar with it, yeah, nice. So is that first edition and sixth?
This is first. I'm sorry. This one is first edition, hardcover.
Yeah.
And this is sixth edition. And
Nice.
I have the intermittent 4 between them.
Out in the garage somewhere, I have every single edition of, well, I should say like the first 4 editions of Cyberpunk. Like Cyberpunk 2020, which is, they were woefully off the mark. They missed the mark on that one, so, in a huge way. So you played Shadowrun. What other role-playing games have you been into?
Oh, man. Oh, let's see. Let's go back to the mid-'80s. D&D from, I think I basically start with the first edition, go into the second edition, Call of Cthulhu, Paranoia.
Paranoia is phenomenal.
Twilight 2000, then a large gap of nothing, BattleTech, Mech Warrior, Traveler.
I'm so glad to hear somebody else in the world play Traveler. Was it the black book with the red stripe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Branched off to Magic for a bit, back to D&D, Shadowrun, Marvel superheroes, DC Heroes. So it's kind of gone every which way. One
of the things I wanted to ask you, I actually really respect your approach to role-playing games, because I know you have a long history of it, but now currently, like, your current party seems to be largely your kids, which I think is great, because role-playing games, for me, when I was a teenager, when I was about the same age your kids are, I wasn't doing well in school, I wasn't engaged, and my elementary 6th grade teacher basically said, hey, let me introduce you to this thing, and it was the Red Book Basic D&D, right? And he said, hey, read this, take this home and read it. And I read it, and I loved it, and I was automatically like hooked. And his whole bribe to me was, start turning in your homework, start getting good grades on your tests, and every Friday at 1:00, instead of doing study time with everybody else in the class, I'm going to excuse you to go to the library and play D&D with the other troublemakers. And that changed everything. Like, we all became good students because we were going to go play D&D, damn it. And because of that, a lifelong love of geography, history, mythology, all of that stuff was born, right? So very transformative for me. Now, 40 some odd years later, I'm looking back on this and going, was the Red Book really a good game? Was Advanced D&D a good game, or is that just nostalgia? We have, like you were saying with Shadowrun, 6 editions.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a best edition of Shadowrun in your mind?
I'm going to argue. I'm going to make an argument.
Yeah.
Let's use both Shadowrun and Advanced D&D 3.5, 5, and 5.5 as my benchmarks here. And I'm going to say that the best edition of the game is the one that brings you to the table. Whatever scratches that itch for you.
Right.
And granted, going from first edition where they were like, we're making this up as we go along, but here's what we got. And then going all the way up to 6th edition where they've streamlined some things, changed a few things. Looking at it over the course of 6 editions, what was it? 4th was a bear.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, you want rules mongering? Here comes the tomes of knowledge. And D&D, I think that first edition and even basic just D&D were, they were the launch pads. I mean, granted, if you want to take it back to Time Magazine just recently did a special edition talking about the history of D&D and how Gary Gygax and another gentleman whose name I now forget were actually players of chainmail, not chainmail at the point, wargaming. And it's like historical wargaming. And they were like, well, why can't you just do this with elves?
Story. Yeah.
And they're like, well, let's try this. And in between the two of them, they hashed out what became the rule set that we know as the first chainmail. Because they're like, well, we can do this with wolves and orcs and what have you, as opposed to tanks and actual historical armies. Over time, that evolved into the first edition of D&D. And, I will admit, the first time I played D&D was 1982 at a summer computer camp in Connecticut.
We've literally been playing the same amount of time.
My cabin counselor got the 6 of us in the cabin together one night, and he's like, okay, here we go. And we played. It was kind of like, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then, we had the week and a half, 2 weeks in camp, and then we weren't there anymore, so we weren't playing anymore. But then jumped forward a few years and playing in college and got the hardcover first edition Player's Handbook and started going through that. And we had a group of kids on our floor. And I think that our base party, I think, was like 7 of us playing. And then there's this one guy who played 5 characters at the same time.
Well,
yeah, that didn't get weird at all.
No.
But again, I think that, it depends on what you want. And looking at the rules from first and second edition and looking at how they've changed things at 5th edition to kind of make it, to lower the barrier to entry. Because let's face it, you show somebody, you've got 6 different kinds of dice. You've got all of these number charts and tables that you have to work with. And it looks, for some people, it's just like, and they have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. You pull this page open for AD&D on a date in the late 80s, and you're going home.
It's no longer a date.
Yeah. It's like, I did what? Oh, no. When
you find something that works, and sometimes you'll find that a subsequent edition of a game doesn't work as well for what you want, or that the game itself has diverged from the way that you want to run the game, or the type of game you want to run, but there's a variant of it, like Pathfinder in this case. Find what works for you. I mean, there are numerous D&D offshoots that I've seen over the years, and I've used adaptations in games like as source material and role aids. But there have been so many not D&D things that I've brought into D&D, and it's what brings you to the table. Because I want to try this character. I want to try and, can you make this work? And like you were saying with Starfleet Battles, I got into Starfleet Battles when Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, which is both lovely and horrible, because you're like, well, what can we do with all of this? And you see the things like the first saucer separation, your jaw hits the ground. You're like, wait, what? Can I do that with my ship? And apparently, theoretically, you could in that rule set.
Right.
But one of the things that we did, that I figured out, and we had a few of us in our group who decided to play Starfleet Battles, and so I actually figured out the Picard maneuver in what you needed as far as a crew and equipment to make it work, and pulled
Mhm.
it off in a game. Somebody looked at me like, "What did you just do?" And I'm like, "Picard maneuver."
Well, and that kind of lifting though, like that's fun for you, and it might have even been fun for your group. But for like a person who's getting into the game, that could
Hmm.
probably be one of the most alienating things in the world, right?
Well, right, and that's again, read the room.
Right,
And
right.
about a month ago, as an example, a friend's family and ours had realized we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and they were like, "Well, you know, it'd be a great thing. Why don't you teach us how to play D&D?"
Mhm.
Okay, so just went with fifth edition just because I had the books. And I could spare my fifth edition PH to him to and his wife to figure out characters and everything. And then my girls were the sage, learned adventurers leading them through,
The
which was
grizzled
an
preteen
experience.
adventurers.
It's like, well, okay, but they were the ones who understood the game, knew what they were
Right.
doing, and could kind of teach the old folks, well, come along and do this, not bogging it down with all of the esoterics that you can for D&D or any game, and doing it where you're not trying to completely make them go, I never want to see anything that looks like this again.
Right.
And by the end of the adventure, and I kept it kind of short, just a sewer crawl with enough challenges to not necessarily kill, but put a threat in front of everybody, and a couple of red herrings that led to the wrong answer. At the end of a couple of hours, we were done, and they finished everything I had planned for them. Had gone through the sewers, and the bottom line was, when I was like, "So, what do you think?" It's like, we had fun,
Mhm.
and that's what I was after, is we had fun.
My emphasis right now is less on role playing games and more on strategic tabletop war
Hmm.
games, which is kind of funny because the genesis of D&D, like you were saying, was historical war games. Like
Hmm.
historical war games traditionally for most wargamers have no appeal to them until they hit about 45, and then all of a sudden they're like, I love this, let's reenact Waterloo. um, I love these dragoons, they're my favorite. So at 55 now I find myself looking at them and going, well, could maybe those guys hunt vampires? Could Prussians hunt vampires? Well, that's a game called Silver Bayonet by Joe McCullough, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But it's the best of both worlds. It's fantasy monsters and historical wargaming. But
There you go.
a little company in England called Games Workshop got together because they wanted to make miniatures for D&D, and they made a magazine called White Dwarf where they
Hmm.
printed supplemental D&D material. And they started putting out so many miniatures for D&D that had a particular flair to them and a particular look to them that at one point they said, hey, how about we take all our D&D miniatures and make a fantasy war game? Why can't we play D&D but without all the role playing and with elves? So like you're saying, why can't we play historicals but with elves, right? And then so you get
Right.
D&D with the role playing. Because Chainmail, if you look at it, is actually more of a tabletop war game than a role
Yeah,
playing
it
game.
totally is.
Right. And like one of my favorite war games is actually an RPG with war game elements. At the end of the day, you need a DM to run it, even though you're not really role playing. It's a long story. So you end up with a game like Warhammer, which is now like the tabletop miniature equivalent of Wizards of the Coast with D&D.
Hmm.
And now currently working on their 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000, their 4th edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, their 50,000th edition, well, technically 10th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. In That's where I get into this thing where I start thinking, do we need all these editions? Because in some cases, you could say, in the case of D&D, this 5.5 that they just put out was really more of a polish pass.
Yes.
And they just recently did that with Pathfinder, where they put out the new core books that just basically fixed all of the broken elements of the second edition of Pathfinder. 5.5, from what I understand, is a really nice polish of
Hmm.
5. And when did 5th edition come out? 2015, 16, somewhere in that range?
Uh, Somewhere around there.
Yeah. And I started thinking about it when 5.5 came out because you and I were talking about it. We're both really excited. I was nerding out over the dragon art because it was so good. But I started thinking about when I came back to D&D. I'd played up till second edition and a little bit of third edition. Didn't do 3.5. Came back for fourth. And a lot of people were really hating on fourth edition because they thought it was adding a World of Warcraft element because your characters hit like a almost like a certain point of action points where they could activate a power almost, it seemed like. And a lot of people were kind of hating on that. And I felt bad at that point because it's like, what if you really loved 4th edition? What if 4th edition was your gateway? I still look back fondly on AD&D, even though I would never play it again because I loved it and I had fun with it. So nostalgia tells me it was a great edition.
Well, right. And, looking at the second edition, looking at the rulebook for second edition, at least, some of the things is like, it's a little bit of a slog.
Yeah.
It was, now, looking at it compared to first edition, it was the polish edition.
Right.
But at that point, D&D first edition in basic had been out for close to 12 or so years. So it was time to bring a little balance into some things and like make it, again, lowers the barrier to entry. And they did that well to a degree.
Mm.
And I think that you're right. In looking at it, would I go back to second edition? No. Would I look at some of the elements of second edition, the world building stuff that hasn't necessarily been adapted yet into later editions and go, yes. Or even take things from like Dragon Magazine or Dungeon Magazine and go, that would be cool. If your gateway is 4th edition and that's your warm, fuzzy, sparkly spot in gaming, great. And don't let anybody take that from you. I mean,
No.
You can look at the new stuff and go, can I work with this? Or do I just want to stay in this little pocket of my own little universe? Do that.
I have to agree with you completely, especially looking at just recently I looked at the new BattleTech starter set, and it's very user friendly.
Yeah,
it's still one of the crunchiest games out there. Like you're gonna look at it and go, whoa, that's a lot of, I need a slide rule, I need a calculator. Luckily it's all on phones now. But compared to the original FASA BattleTech, it's not going to abuse you and steal your lunch money.
correct.
You're probably going to have a good time with it. The miniatures are better than they've ever been, which I love. I kind of wish they went back to a clicks format because didn't HeroClix? No, they had Mech Warrior. They had
Mech Warrior, HeroClix, and Attack Wing was their space-based Star Wars,
and
Star Trek stuff.
I think the Mech Warrior HeroClix were pretty cool, and that's another thing that I talk about with people with tabletop games. Yeah, they can be really, really expensive, but you have games like HeroClix, which is actually not a hard game to play, hard to master, but you can get a brick of HeroClix or go on eBay and pick up secondhand HeroClix for $1 a piece and put together a pretty good thing. So if you're looking at a game like Marvel Crisis Protocol where the figures run $15 to $20 a piece, and you don't know if maybe you want to play a tabletop game, then try something that's less expensive like HeroClix. Or you can go to your friendly local game store or your comic shop and probably find a starter HeroClix box for $25 that'll have, a unit that's ready to play on it. As we've been talking, one of the things that dawned on me, you're talking about that entry point, like getting new people into the game. And I remembered what has become my arsenal, like the best piece of an arsenal for me as a person who wants to introduce people to a new game, and that's the starter box. And there are some amazing starter boxes out there right now. If you look at companies like Modifius, they use a Year Zero engine that they started for their Mutant Year Zero game, which is a phenomenal game, but they have the Star Trek license. And if you have people who want to play Star Trek but have never played a role-playing game, the starter box from Modifius for their Star Trek adventure game is fantastic. Yes, it's pre-generated characters, but making a character can be intimidating. So yes. I hand you a security officer and say, you're the security officer. What's a security officer? Well, that's Worf. That's
Scotty.
That's Scotty. It's Chief O'Brien on certain days, right? So this is what you do, and you're going to play Star Trek, and I'm going to explain the rules as we go. And those beginner books can be so user friendly for new game masters, for new players, and it's all included. It's like $20 for the D&D. I think it's $25. Pathfinder has one that's about $25. Almost any game worth playing has a starter box that's going to get you introduced to the game, even if you're a veteran, even if you're like you and you know these games. I love when we're doing Geek Show and people will be like, hey, Rob, what's the best levitation spell if my guy ate too much oatmeal, right? And you're like, oh, it's Featherbottom's Flingering Flotsam, and it works. But okay, For instance, Free League. Wondering if you want to play Middle Earth role-playing games. This starter box has pre-generated characters and it has an adventure that takes place outside of the Shire. But if you decide that you love it, then they've got more. So much more. And it's the same with D&D. I've only got a few D&D books up here because I realize D&D is not my passion. I like Pathfinder more, but I still like the art. So I buy the monster books, right?
Of course.
So,
Or
yeah,
you could just get the cards now. You could just get the monster cards and be like, look, they fit in a binder.
Look, D&D is so wild. Like, my mom still buys the monster manuals. Every new edition that comes out, my mom buys the monster manuals because she loves the monster art, right? So
Your mom and my mom have such different takes on D&D.
yeah,
Such different takes. Your mom's buying books. My mom tried to have me committed. It's great.
the 80s were a trip. We're going to actually talk about that in an upcoming episode. We're going to talk about the Satanic Panic. We're going to talk about the cultural ramifications of role-playing games in society in the 80s, because two things came about simultaneously during the 80s. And one was the advent of online message boards,
Mm-hmm.
and the other was role-playing games. And those online message boards are largely, I didn't know this until doing a panel at Comic-Con a few years ago with a Star Wars book writer who was like, hey, let's talk about this. And he was talking about the advent of message boards in very conservative church groups and how they'd message each other about, oh, well, this D&D game, it's all about Satan, and it's going to convert your children into terrible, terrible sins. And that's how they got...
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was like, instead of putting up a text on the board that said, your children worshiping Satan with D&D, it was all electronic. We'll talk about that in the future. And also, very shortly, we have a guest that we're going to have joining us in a week, possibly 2 weeks, to talk about the entry of Gunpla in tabletop gaming, which has bigger ramifications than I think a lot of people are aware of. So we're going to have Leigh. He's a longtime friend of Geekshow, is also one hell of a Gunpla painter, to come on and talk about where those two hobbies overlap, because they actually have a huge amount of overlap that, again, maybe not a lot of people are aware of. In a nutshell then, Rob, I know you say to you the best edition is the one that gets you to the table. What's your best edition of a game?
Oh, wow. Best edition of the game. Right now, I'm actually going to say for D&D, it's 5.5.
Okay.
I like the way that they've balanced things. They've changed some things from 5 that I'm still kind of adapting to, but it hasn't broken anything for me. And, at the end of the day, I get to play with my kids and their friends, and, running a party of teenagers is
That's
something.
Herculean. That
It
is
is
Herculean.
something.
I could barely run a party of teenagers when I was a teenager. I can't imagine doing it when I was as an adult. It's interesting because there was a lot of outrage in the geekosphere about 5.5. And then
Mhm.
I did the math and I was like, well, wait a second. It's been almost a decade since 5th edition came out. So a polished pass is not a bad thing compared to, say, Games Workshop, where they put out a new edition, whether you like it or not, every 3 years.
Yeah.
Of all their flagship games. And that gets expensive. Those books aren't cheap. This, for me, is the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game from Games Workshop. This is actually, I've started collecting the old editions, so this is from 2002. And it's funny because this was their best game, literally.
Oh, okay.
It takes a lot of the core mechanics from the Warhammer game, but it makes them work in a way that is so elegant and so simple. Now, you mentioned Paranoia earlier. I remember playing Paranoia in the late 80s and going, oh my God, this game is so elegantly simple. And your job is to kill all the players.
Oh, not only is your job to kill all the players, but your job is also not to die stupidly.
Or to die as stupidly as possible.
Oh, well, okay.
That was always my goal.
Touche.
Yeah. I thought it was fantastic. You didn't level, you just went up a different letter in the rainbow, Raging Biv. Fun game. They still have a new edition with that. It's fun looking through the old Traveler rulebook, even though I know the new edition of it's actually quite phenomenal. If you are talking about role-playing games, though, I would say your best thing, I agree with you 100%, is whatever gets you to the table. There are some games out there that are so elegantly simple that don't have a huge barrier to entry, but that's not for everybody. Some people like a certain amount of crunch. Some people like to do their homework. Some people like to bring a huge 3-wing binder full of adventure with them. I have a friend who plays the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game from Palladium Books, the old edition, and
Wow.
he's got binders and binders and binders of notes that he's taken on this stuff. It's so cool. So we'd love to hear from you in the comments about what your favorite game is, what your favorite game system is, what your favorite edition is, because, again, if it brings you joy, play the damn game. Have fun with it. And if you like what we're doing, please let us know about that. What are you currently playing, Rob?
The D&D campaign with the kids is on, I think, a temporary hiatus. I think most of that was due to winter break. We'll see how things hash out after people settle into spring term. I've been invited to a Call of Cthulhu game, which I have not played Call of Cthulhu outside of once over Christmas in probably better than 10 years. And as you're mentioning, talking about the social ramifications of gaming, there's an element, especially with Call of Cthulhu, that I apparently bring to a game that none of my friends have brought to it, which is, so let me get this straight. This is the 20s, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to play that up. And not everybody understands what I'm doing at the time, which is fun for me. A little harrowing sometimes for the game master.
Yeah.
But it's like hey, everybody goes into this room. Can I go in there? Yeah, the door's right there. Can I go in? Yeah, it's a door. And I go in. Oh. And, it's like, if we're doing this, we're going to do it. That's kind of my take on it. And, being able to do a little social commentary through gaming with my friends who might not have a perspective that I have is always kind of fun.
We're also going to be talking Call of Cthulhu in an upcoming episode because, for those folks who don't know, H.P. Lovecraft was a paranoid alienist, and
Slightly racist.
That's putting it kindly. He was fairly certain that anything not white was out to destroy the white race, and there's some fascinating documentary content out there from Guillermo del Toro, who, long story short, acclaimed Mexican director, who says, yes, I love H.P. Lovecraft's work. He would hate me for loving it, because the man just, again, not white, not right, as far as Lovecraft was concerned. That doesn't mean that his books were bad. He wrote some amazing stuff, and Call of Cthulhu is one hell of a game. The latest edition from Chaosium is probably the best one, which is kind of a fun way to wrap things up here. Really quick, I wanted to make sure, go visit Rob on Instagram with Action Figure Theater. He does just about every day you put something up. Yeah, and I'm in awe not only of your collection, but of your backdrops and your photography skill and your captioning skill. It's fantastic. I'm at grimly.com, where I'm trying to post 3-4 times a week. It's where I'm blogging all of my miniature painting, because I paint so much and so prolifically that sometimes I need to go back and look and remember what I painted, because I forget. We're talking hundreds of miniatures a year that I paint. Make sure also to join us on Geekshow Podcast. We'd love to see you every single week, and we'll be back next week. I'm hoping either we'll be talking Gunpla. We do have some topics planned out for the next several months. We're going to be talking about things like the problematic nature of Vampire the Masquerade and how to make it not problematic. So thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.